Computer graphics hardware and technology has always held a special place in my heart. I remember being very young and being gifted an 8-bit microcomputer, which was pretty old when I received it, but even so I remember poring over the computer's manual and typing commands into BASIC to get graphics to appear on screen and just being in absolute awe of what I was seeing. And then this trend continued when 3DFX and their rivals were launching cards such as the 3DFX Voodoo series. So yeah, it's fair to say that when it comes to computer graphics technology, I've always been really interested in seeing what's actually possible. Believe it or not though, it's been almost a year now since Nvidia have launched the RTX 20 series of GPUs, and a lot's changed since their launch. Now their rivals, AMD, have launched the RX 5700 and 5700 XT based GPUs as well. And in not too long, we're going to have a third contender enter the arena, Intel. My name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be analysing the current state of the GPU market and how it's likely to change over the next year, with Intel and AMD currently fiercely competing against one another, and in not too long, Intel joining the fray. Oh, and we're going to be going through these companies in alphabetical order, just because. The launch of a new architecture always brings lots of excitement, and RDNA from AMD was definitely eagerly awaited. The architecture will also be found in the next generation consoles too, albeit likely with more than a little tweaking and tucking for both Sony and Microsoft's implementation of the silicon. According to AMD, this is the largest change in graphical architecture from the company since the introduction of GCN back in 2012 with its Southern Island family. We've gone deeper into RDNA multiple times before and also discussed much of the possible console implementations with our Project Scarlet video, so I don't want to focus too much of this video on the underlying technology. But to summarise, there's a significant difference in approach that AMD took for this latest architecture. Essentially, it should be much more optimised for graphics out of the gate now, and along with efficiency in the graphics architecture itself, including but not limited to better handling of wavefronts for graphics, improved cache structure, and also improved compression across the board, we also see a shrunk process from 14nm down to 7nm. Of course, the RX 5700 series isn't the first 7nm card available from the company, with the Radeon 7 holding the honour of being the first mainstream gaming card produced on the 7nm process. AMD have also stated they think of RDNA first generation much how they did with the first generation of Zen, and that they have an aggressive roadmap for the future. We can take that basically as AMD telling us that the second generation of RDNA will most likely have IPC tweaks rather than just a more shaders approach, possibly with improvements in the process and production of the silicon to boot. With GCN, AMD pushed the architecture as far as it could naturally go, but now they're starting from a relatively clean slate with RDNA, so it'll be interesting to see how the architecture evolves over time. According to a technical slide from the company, about 15% of the performance of RDNA is from frequency and power improvements, around 60% is per clock enhancements, basically IPC, with the remainder of the percentage being the 7nm process. Therefore, I don't think AMD shifting to 7nm to combat Nvidia's Turing is necessarily a bad sign for RDNA versus Ampere, assuming we can see the design further evolve and improve, which AMD are hinting that it will. We do know that the next generation of RDNA will also feature hardware ray tracing, so we can definitely imagine that some architectural changes will be necessary to implement that. We've already seen the hybrid ray tracing pattern online, and assuming this is the design that AMD go with for the desktop, who knows, it could be a Sony or Microsoft implementation, or even a design that doesn't end up getting used, the texture of the GPU will be part of the ray tracing process. So yes, this will definitely require tweaks across the entire GPU. I do feel more confident about AMD's RDNA cards than I did a few weeks before the launch. AMD have kicked themselves in the shin by using a blower style cooler, which isn't the best for keeping temperatures under control. Indeed, there's already been a number of mods floating around the internet which improve things, and I think custom cards will probably improve the situation more. And it will be interesting to see how AIBs end up clocking their cards. My discussion with multiple AIBs and also the actions of the companies in terms of production shows they are pretty happy investing engineering resources into the Radeon cards. Basically, AIBs believe in what AMD is selling, which is definitely a good sign. We've seen similar in fact with the Ryzen 3000 series, with board manufacturers happy to create lots of X570 boards for the CPU's launch, as they were much more confident now about AMD's product offerings with Ryzen 3000. RTG is definitely being much smarter with its decisions, and we've discussed the whole debated thing several times in the past week. Essentially, I had speculated that AMD's E3 2019 announced pricing and then subsequent drop was likely a strategy by the company to force Nvidia's response, and indeed, AMD confirmed that it basically did troll Nvidia. The Radeon Technologies group is now in a great position to compete in the mid-range segment, and we can certainly imagine AMD will be offering lower-end SKUs to take on the likes of Nvidia's 16 series soon enough. After all, we've already seen the Navi 14 benchmarks leak. Taking a guess though, we're probably going to see the cards appear a little later because AMD are currently waiting for the Polaris series to disappear from shelves. But for gamers craving 4K visuals, Nvidia are currently your only alternative, and that's definitely frustrating. With all the different filings though for other card names we've seen, perhaps AMD will choose to launch higher end SKUs later on this year. From what I've learnt though through a few sources before the cards launched, this was back in March, I was told that Nave was really Raja's final hurrah at RTG, and it had been his personal mission to fix the issues which were underlying with the GCN architecture as well as improve efficiency for graphics. I feel pretty good though that David Wang and other key members over at RTG can continue to push the hardware. On the rumour side of the equation, I had also been told by the source who had also informed me about Nave next generation featuring ray tracing that AMD will likely continue to evolve future architectures depending on usage scenarios. To clarify, compute and graphics would essentially be separate branches of technology to optimize performance for that specific workload. For example, while the RX 5700 XT is almost as fast as the Radeon 7 in many game titles, it is behind in a lot of professional and compute tasks, simply because of the different architecture of RDNA. Therefore, AMD providing different solutions for different customers is going to be critical. I've also been told though that they are planning to possibly produce a workstation RDNA card, but possibly those plans have changed over the months. Out of the three companies that we're discussing, Intel are definitely the odd duck out. Because while they're no stranger to producing graphics hardware, there is a reason that they're launching Generation 11 graphics with Ice Lake and it's not Generation 1, they're not exactly so experienced with discrete graphics. One can make a compelling argument that with Raja Koduri, Chris Hook, and a plethora of other talent that Intel have also snatched up from other companies, including Nvidia, that Intel's team is not exactly devoid of experience, and Intel as a company are not without resources. Generation 11 graphics so far looks really good, judging from the early benchmarks, some official and some less official. The less official benchmarks actually put the Generation 11 iGPU ahead of AMD's Vega APUs, albeit with non-final hardware and software as of the time that I'm recording this. We also have info available for digging through the programming and optimization documentation that Intel have nudged out of the door. I've gone deeper into Intel Generation 11 architecture and XE, which is essentially Generation 12. Intel do though have a lot to prove. Hardware performance isn't the only side of the equation, and features and driver stability and optimizations are just as important. If you're playing a game and half the textures are missing, or it takes 4 weeks for the driver team to issue a fix for a crashing issue, it's not going to win customers over. Fortunately though, I do think that Intel are taking the right approach and building up on the software side of things now, and the Intel Graphics Command Center is definitely a step in the right direction, and more games than ever are being optimized for Intel graphics. But of course, there are certain features that just don't make sense to implement yet, such as shadow play, like applications for the iGPU that we've got, or high quality multi-sampling. Generation 12, aka Intel Xe, performance should be a nice leap over Generation 11 graphics, and will be coming to market at some point in 2020, using Intel's 10nm process. The rumour is that Intel will be targeting, quote, market leadership performance. For what it's worth, Intel have told me on the quiet that they are very confident about their Intel Xe discrete cards. But, I'll say it again, words aren't frames rendered on screen. But with any luck, we'll have a great range of cards from the company for gamers. For bleeding edge, but also for more budget-focused folks too. Though another rumour tells us that ray tracing won't come until the second generation of Xe, which would be curious and also leave them as the only company out of the three in 2020 that doesn't have hardware ray tracing for a consumer level card. I do suspect that hardware ray tracing will start taking off much more in late 2020 as well as 2021. After all, this will coincide with the launch of the next generation consoles. The rumour has it that Intel will be leveraging an MCM chiplet-like design for Xe, but there is some disagreement on whether this will be for the first or second generation of the cards. Intel will also need to convince gamers that their cards are worth picking up over Nvidia or AMD. And to do that, they're going to need to nail the prices of the cards, as well as the performance, as well as the features. Perhaps Intel will choose to go with thinner margins to compete the best they can on price and also establish a fan base. We can also hope that they're going to work with AIBs too. The really weird thing about this situation, at least to me, is that in a year or so, there's a very reasonable possibility that the best combination of hardware is an Intel GPU and an AMD CPU. That's kinda cool. Oh, and there are also rumours circulating the internet that Intel will be creating different products based on the usage scenario as well. I've mentioned about the MCM designs a moment ago, but I suspect that this will be more than simply segmenting performance tiers, and bolting on different configurations of silicon will be much easier with chiplets. And I wouldn't be surprised if all three vendors go with this approach over the next year or so. Nvidia's overconfidence got them into a bit of trouble with the RTX series of cards, and while I am a fan of the hardware-based ray tracing visuals as well as DLSS, as well as other technologies, which, by the way, I also interviewed Nvidia about, which you can find on the channel, Nvidia simply handled the launch of RTX 20 poorly. Not only was the pricing off, but the lack of actual software which worked with the cards was, well, yeah. Fortunately for them anyway, it's starting to take care of itself, and now the Super 20 series is here. We can argue that Turing is much better in terms of value. Turing is of course an evolved Volta architecture, which was itself a pretty big departure from Pascal. Turing allows simultaneous integer and floating point execution, better cache structure and other shiny features to squeeze the most of what's possible out of the 12nm process. Regarding the future, we don't really know much about the GeForce 30 series of cards, only that we think it is using Ampere. And I emphasise the word think because, well, it's possible Ampere will only be for data centres, i.e. much like Volta, and instead we'll see a tweaked or different version of an architecture making its way for us gamers with the GeForce cards. Nvidia do have a couple of options for GeForce 30. The first is jumping on a 7nm version of Turing, albeit but bump the clocks a bit more, add additional SMs and other tweaks as necessary. And then there's the more exciting prospect, and that is that we'll see an entirely new architecture, let's call it Ampere, and also move on to the 7nm process. Whether though Ampere will be a radical departure from Turing, or whether it'll be similar but with tweaks here and there, well, that's just the question we don't know the answer to yet. The RX 5700 put a lot of pressure on Nvidia for the mid-range, but right now they are still without rivals for the higher end cards such as RTX 2080 or above. With that said though, AMD having RDNA in the next generation consoles definitely benefit Team Red, and Intel definitely have eyes on Nvidia's data center market share. Actually, AMD does as well, come to think of it. This means that while Nvidia are currently the market leader, they're also the company that both Intel and AMD want to take pie from. The largest portion of gamers also don't want to cough up $1,000 for a graphics card, and so AMD competing in the mid-range offerings is definitely a smart move to sell the most volume. Ultimately, Nvidia have a target on its back, but with that said, I don't think they're going to be in trouble anytime soon. I suspect no matter what happens though, Nvidia will double down on hardware ray tracing, and we can certainly imagine they'll be keen to improve performance from their ray tracing cores, either by simply making the hardware faster at processing instructions or by increasing the number of ray tracing cores in a GPU. That does have negatives though, such as eating up more space on the die. Given RTX is Nvidia's own spin on ray tracing, I will be curious also how the industry evolves when DXR comes into its own. I've spoken a lot more about this in the Project Scala analysis video, but in brief, DXR is Microsoft's API for ray tracing, working in conjunction with DirectX 12. Given the next Xbox has hardware ray tracing, Microsoft have confirmed this, we can assume it's DXR based, and also going to be designed around a relatively open ecosystem. So, how Nvidia attempts developers to optimize for its RTX software and also how the industry adjusts with ray tracing implementation is going to be very cool to witness. So to wrap things up, by the time Intel do launch the XE series of cards, the next generation consoles will also be close to launching too. And with their launch, we can presume ray tracing is going to be a lot more commonplace in games. So it's going to be very interesting with the impact of the next generation consoles, not only with ray tracing, but also what's going to happen with the GPU market on the PC. We can predict that the next generation systems are going to be $400 to $500 US. I don't think many people are going to want to cough up, let's say, $600 or $700 for a console after all. With mid-range GPUs costing $400 or $500 US, therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if quite a number of people just decide to buy a next-generation console and, enjoy it for a year or two and then maybe jump back into PC gaming. It's kind of weird that we're looking at cards which cost several hundred US and are considered mid-range, such as Nvidia's RTX 2070. But when you have cards such as the RTX 2080 Ti, which cost upwards of $1,000, then yeah, a $500 card, like it or not, is, I guess, technically a mid-range solution. Back when the 8800 GTX launched, you could pick up a flagship model for around $600 US, but times have changed and graphics cards to get the latest and greatest are definitely more expensive. With that said though, I don't necessarily think that PC gaming is in a bad position for graphics, particularly right now. You could actually argue that purchasing a GPU right now is probably one of the best times in quite a long time. We no longer have the GPU mining craze causing prices to do that, and people quite literally buying truckfuls of GPUs. Seriously, multiple AIBs told me that they were trying their best to supply shops with cards, but what would happen is they sent over a shipment and some retailers, I'm not going to name names, I was told a couple but I'm not going to name them, they quite literally would just call a customer and say, hey, we've got like 100 whatever graphics cards in stock, do you want them? And then they would just basically sell the whole lot to this customer. And so as soon as they got the cards, they would be going straight out again. So at least we don't have to deal with that. Plus as well, we know that the GPU market probably isn't going to change a whole lot. There are some exceptions, such as the custom AIB variants of the RX 5700 series. And we also know that AMD are going to be launching lower end RDNA cards, such as, let's assume it's going to be called the 5600, but if you're looking to plonk down, let's say around $400, $500 for a card, or even more, then chances are very good that you're not going to suddenly feel like something else has just popped out and that your purchase was an error. So that's definitely a good thing. And I am very hopeful that AMD's GPU roadmap will be very aggressive with RDNA. And I'm also very optimistic with Intel and the XE line of cards. Having more choice is always a great thing as a consumer. So hopefully with the third contender, we're no longer going to have just one option. So if AMD or Nvidia screw up for a generation, we can at least be like, hey, at least we've got Intel. Or if Intel screw up, at least we've got AMD and Nvidia, and so on and so on. And with any luck anyway, that will help to keep the prices a little more honest. With all of that said though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then you know what to do. Like, share, comment and subscribe. And you can also find us, of course, on the social media platforms of your choice. Well, at least a couple of them from your choice, found in the description of this very video. With all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.